Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is this is Tom here. This is a week that we're going into using our work from last week on advertising and moving into branding. A similar topic for sure, but just a little bit different, a little bit different content. And the goal here is to provide you a little bit of background, some context, and then launch into sort of the wiki assignment for the week. Two different chapters, one of them from this one here from a Twitchell, chapter from a book from Twitchell in 2004 called Branded Nation, the Marketing of Megachurch, College, Inc., and the Museum World. As you can kind of tell from the title, that more and more of civic life is being branded, right? Living in the city of Bend, city of Redmond, city of Prineville, even cities now, right? It's a branded identity. And creating images and ideas and ideals and values. And, it's like, it's this sort of way of sort of promoting this idea about particular products. And we're moved from products, as we'll talk about here in a little bit, to cities and towns and museums and colleges becoming products. And that leaves us with some, some critical thoughts and critical questions to ask about that process and sort of what does that leave us when we take things that were part of sort of civic, the sort of civic society and part of sort of the public world and move it more into, the commercial world is being encroaching upon that public world more and more. And then the other chapter is called Branded Identity. It's chapter 5, Branded Identities from Barber. His article or his book, Consumed: How Markets Corrupt, Infantilize Adults, and Swallow Citizens Whole. As you can tell, he has a real critical look and examination of this movement from, branding into the public sphere, and we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff. All right, so, the basic distinction between advertising and branding, at least the one that I make, is that advertising and advertisements, we're talking about a specific product, or we're analyzing advertisements in sort of like in a larger package. But we're looking at that sort of like, what is the product, right? It's focused on a product and looking at representations. We kind of call back our tripartite approach in cultural studies. We could be looking at three things, right? The production of culture. So we have different mediums of communicating information about products. We go back to early print media, to early radio and television and computers and social media. All those different production, changes in production, the political economy of institutions, shapes potentially advertisements or influences advertisements. And so the three-part approach for the tripartite approach: the production of culture, that political economy, the textual analysis, so examining the text and reviewing the text, looking for symbols, representations, and then finally, audience reception, how a person's social location, race, class, gender, age, political affiliation, etc., shapes and influences how people read or interpret a text, okay? So branding, so the advertisements, we can apply that tripartite approach. We can do it with, and I guess go back for a second. So that advertisements are focused on usually product, or we're looking at advertisements, the collection of them, looking for representations and that kind of stuff. Branding is much more, is deeper. Branding is creating a lifestyle, an identity, an image, a mirage over a particular line of products or a company or an institution is being branded. So we don't advertise, for example, like the local community organizations, city organizations, county organizations. They have a branded identity, but they may not be advertising themselves. So it's about, think about Bernays and public relations in some sort of way. We could sort of make a connection that's about public relations and public image. It's about creating image. And that image may be important for selling products, but it's focused on the image. So branding, I like the idea, is Twitchell talks about, it's the application of a story, that humans are storytelling creatures, cultures, we tell stories within culture. And those stories are important. Stories are important because they're a way of communicating. If you go back, communicating values and ideals, it's a way of becoming socialized into culture. So if we can kind of draw back upon our early work in terms of 3 sociological perspectives, and we think about functionalism, I think about one of the functions of storytelling, that storytelling is a vital function in society. It's the way we learn culture. It's a part of socialization itself. So the challenge becomes one, before we have this sort of modern day or postmodern day of that branding and advertising more and more in our everyday life, and more a part of public institutions, the question becomes one of who's telling the stories now. Where maybe in the past, there was fewer stories being told, and they're more uniform. They're more representative of sort of the general community. And it wasn't about promoting, selling products and ideas. It was about communicating morals and values and ideals. So that shift to commercial raises some disturbing questions for Barber, like what's going on that the stories that we are telling are no longer stories about like Aesop's fables and about morals and values that are about like learning and socialization that are important from the sort of functionalist realm, but rather the stories that we are telling increasingly are becoming ones that are linked to some sort of commercial enterprise. So now profit's going to be more important than the morals and values of the story that are helpful to society at large. I thought it was interesting, you know, this is the example that Twitchell uses or compares different products. And somewhat the ways in which we buy into things, right? We're buying a product, we're buying much more than a product, we're buying an idea. Avion Water, it's not as around as much today as it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago. Avion, E-V-I-A-N. But it's kind of like elite, classy, you know, water. If you spell Avion backwards, it's naive. When I first read this book, I was like, I never really thought about that before. I was like, that's interesting. 9 ounces of that Avion water, right, is calculated, this is in 2004 dollars, $1.49. For a gallon of that water, it's 21 bucks a gallon. And you can turn on your faucet, right, for basically a penny probably, or fractions of a penny for a gallon of water. So why becomes the question, why buy Avion? I think people are buying more than water. Cultural capital, they're buying status and position. People are buying convenience sometimes. They, you know, go to the store and buy it. But even then, I'm like, I'm not sure. But why that particular bottle, and not why not a bottle that is cheaper? It's a brand, right? So the Avion is communicated sort of idea about class. I mean, Avion, even the language itself, communicates a sense about class and sophistication, and people are buying that particular thing. So exchanging, you know, dollars for this image and this illusion. What Twitchell does is provide this long historical perspective of the development and proliferation of branding. And I think hopefully you'll find a lot of value and interest in Twitchell's article, which is a little bit of overlap with Barber. So I kind of focus on Barber a little bit because there were some of the areas that overlap to kind of just provide that historical perspective about branding, and one way to make a distinction between what we call early capitalism and where we're at today, we call late capitalism. So both articles are critically evaluating advertising and marketing. They're critical of the way in which society is being organized around mass consumption and its impact on democratic principles, civic engagement, that we become atomized individuals versus that we need to have, versus at the consequence of the collective, of group connection and group collective will and desire and need and benefit and value. And it's this illusion of, you know, buying, you know, as we become consumers, the ecological impact, environmental impact, and its impact on us, where instead of engaging in the process of, like, you know, the higher calling of understanding humanity, you know, we become consumers. And that consumption process will never satisfy us. So it's turning us away from from relationships, from searching for meaning, from investigation of the human experience, and we become consumers. So let me make this distinction: early capitalism versus late capitalism. And early capitalism is focused on civic space, public institutions, public library, the civic center, the plaza. These become part of early capitalism. Late capitalism, commercial space. So think about, like in European countries, they have a civic space, the plaza. That's a sort of this big open space. There's restaurants, but they're actually behind, there's the focus is on the plaza, tables out in the plaza, kids, people walking around playing. It's this big public space. We have commercial space. That's like late capitalism. I shouldn't say we, but in late capitalist societies, we move to commercial space versus civic space. The shopping mall becomes sort of the comparison. In early capitalism, the idea was to focus on savings. We're talking about early capitalism, focus on, let's say, 1800s, all the way up into World War II, post-World War II, all the way to the 1950s. So it's like these transition points. So 1800s, industrialization, production, all this kind of stuff, early capitalism, civic space, focus on savings and deferred gratification. People didn't have as much access to credit. Benjamin Franklin's statement, a penny saved is a penny earned. That's like that Protestant ethic, deferring gratification, saving for tomorrow. Late capitalism is about consumption. It's about acquiring debt if you need to consume. So it's like consume, consume, consume versus save, 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 right? So thriftiness in the past and indulgence in the present. Early capitalism, producers, late capitalism, consumers. I think that language is an important shift. Where in the past, people were producers, they were workers. Today, people still work, of course, but we are consumers. That's a big part sort of what we do. It's how we keep the economy going is through our consumption. It's not just through our production, but it's through our consumption. Early capitalism, our identities were coming out of and invested in public and social institutions. So religious organizations, civic organizations, civic clubs, things that were represented, that were embedded in the community, institutions that involved in individuals in that civic space. Late capitalism, it's not that people aren't involved in those institutions, but rather in late capitalism, there's a move away from civic organizations to where it becomes important parts of our identity, to commercial and business enterprises and institutions become places of our identities. Early capitalism products fulfill real needs that people have, real needs and real services. Early advertisement was really about just letting people know that there was a product there. Late capitalism, it's about producing wants and producing solutions to those wants. I was watching TV the other day and there was a product that came up for individuals who have cold sores, and I couldn't help but think about the Listerine advertisement, the poor case of Edna, halitosis, this condition, medical condition that Bernays helped create, that bad breath and the fear of bad breath, and that turned into Listerine, a household cleaning product, right? Turn to the Listerine in order to clean your breath, to avoid social embarrassment. And this cold sore advertisement was the same darn thing. It was like somebody had a cold sore and it was, the language of the advertisement, like, don't be caught with a cold sore because it'd be really embarrassing. So take this medication. It's like, I never really thought of it. It's just like, they go away, right? But it's this constructing kind of this sort of sense of fear or constructing this idea that we need to be looking perfect, ideal all the time kind of thing. For the wiki this week, there's a little bit more information, but for the wiki this week, what I want you to do is you can have a couple different choices. One is to take a company that has a long history. So take a company, let's say like Levi's, look at advertising in 3 different time periods. So let's say, 1900, 1950, and today. So look at an advertisement, trying to figure out, basically an advertisement for 3 different time periods, and then just some little, 150, 200 word kind of comments on what do you notice about the changes with the advertisements themselves and how Levi's is changing in terms of its kind of like its branding or its image and its idea. Another one to do that you could take, another approach you could take is to take a particular product, right? So let's say a razor for men or a razor for women. look at 3 different time periods, and then make the time periods at least a decade or two apart. So don't make it like 1986, 87, 88. You know, it's like 1980, 1950, 1920. Looking at advertisements of razors over that time period, and what do you notice in terms of difference in terms of advertising? The third option would be looking for ways in which civic institutions, such as libraries, cities, churches, are marketing themselves, and looking at marketing and branding around that. And in each case, you know, provide the images, and then 150, 200 words in terms of some sort of general explanation, evaluation, analysis of how, in the first 2 cases, how images and advertisements have changed over time. And in the last case, in terms of looking at civic organizations becoming and being branded, what are they, you know, what is the image they're trying to convey? What are they, what is the image, the lifestyle, what is the value that's being conveyed through their work in terms of branding? All right, and so the last couple things, one thing to think about I think is really interesting is that early industrialization, right? So you know, it's like, let's go back to say late 1700s, early 1800s, becoming more and more focused on developing and manufacturing. By the late 1900s, we have a significant increase in the production of consumables and the number of companies that are producing things. So if we look at, you know, just a household item like plates or silverware, or soap, maybe another example. Let's stick with soap. Prior to the, you know, say in the 1800s, probably people were making soap. A lot of people were making soap at home, and there were soap products that were sure that they were out there. It wasn't until the late 1800s, early 1900s, we saw a significant increase in the amount of production of consumable goods and the number of companies producing goods. So soap now all of a sudden becomes mass produced. The number of companies producing soap increases. So what needs to happen is that, or what doesn't need to happen, what happens is that if you have so many more of a consumable item and so many more companies, well, then how do you distinguish between different companies? Basically, what's the difference between Palmolive and Ivory soap? It's like, well, it's not. I mean, they have to do something to distinguish themselves, and so they distinguish themselves by focusing on, in the past, by focusing on what their product did differently than their competitor. Today, the focus isn't on what our product does as much as the image and the ideal behind that particular product, right? So people are, I mean, if you go back, I don't know, 25, 30 years and ask people, you know, do you think people would be spending $4 or $5 for a cup of coffee? People probably thought you're crazy. It's like, why, you know, it's like, why would people be buying, you know, $4 or $5 for a cup of coffee? You know, I'm thinking about the development of Starbucks really transformed culture. And people are buying more than just a cup of coffee. I mean, they can, you know, this becomes a sort of idea that before people were producers, right now they're consumers going somewhere to buy, take care of that particular need. But also buying more. I mean, Starbucks has branded itself. I mean, they had sort of branded identity. The third place, then they're sort of decided the third place is not home, not work. It's this third place of people to be. I mean, it's sort of this place of comfort, sophistication, the coffee house. And they really advanced that particular idea. So companies have to differentiate themselves. Then that could be through, you know, advertising, imaging, architecture, design, basically offering similar product, but they have to sort of make a distinction. So the old versus the new ads are going to change. I mean, Levi's, early days, didn't have as many competitors. Now a lot of competitors, they moved to not what their product does, but sort of image, lifestyle, branding, and connection. That's kind of one way to think about it too. Yeah, I mean, the last kind of thing, you know, to kind of think about is one of the things that troubles both Twitchell and Barber is the further encroachment of advertising and marketing ideals into the public realm. And one of them that's easy to go after and look at and examine would be political parties. Political parties become brands. it's about the message versus the content of the message. It's taking complex social issues and boiling them down into images or phrases or very few words. And this, just campaign strategies, right? I mean, nothing new in terms of campaign strategies, but now we've kind of moved in the world of, it's like, rather than move into the realm of, it's a whole brand that parties are creating brands and are creating identities around them, and we become invested in those particular identities as well. So there's been a lot of work on that area, just sort of branded identities, political parties, and it's fracturing and disruption of communities and society. Got to ask the question, what are we buying, substance, or are we buying image and illusion? And that becomes kind of the question. All right, carry on, be well. Thanks for all you're doing for the class. If you ever have any questions, definitely drop me an email. We're kind of like entering the last few weeks of the term, believe it or not. So we'll continue carrying on. Have a good rest of your week, and have fun with looking up different advertisements, making connections past, present. I'll be really curious to read your analysis. All right, au revoir.